I'm 68 years old. So, not a kid, and this is the 21st century. The first time I sat down with Graham Alvord, we talked about his youth, spending summers in Kittery Point, swimming, doing things that boys did then. He even watched the trolley go by every day. Imagine a trolley in Kittery Point. It actually tipped over once on the curve near the Congregational Church. He tells a wonderful story about that. Now, I know the trolley ceased operation a long time ago, and sitting opposite this bright-eyed, vibrant man with a quick smile and flawless memory, I was confused. You remember this? I was 6, he replied. Then it hit me. He's talking about the early 20th century, the last century. Graham Alvord was 6 years old. My dad wasn't born yet. It was the beginning of a 100-year journey. In 1916, Packard Motor Company introduced the revolutionary twin-six engine. The first blood transfusion was performed. The Red Sox won the World Series with the mighty George Herman Ruth on the mound. Boeing Aviation began building airplanes. For the first time, Americans could talk on the telephone from coast to coast. The war to end all wars was far from over. Radio was an idea. Movies were silent. The Memorial Bridge in Portsmouth was still 7 years away. And Graham Gillette Alvord was born.
When the president, Roosevelt, proposed Lend-Lease, things were getting tougher and tougher for the Brits, and France had already given up. We didn't know much about the Russians. And when that piece of legislation, it was passed by one vote. And I thought, okay, Hitler cannot expect really any serious help from us, and Hitler's going to go through the rest of Europe, and we'll eventually wake up to the seriousness of it for us. And we'd probably be in the war for 15 years. Well, we didn't think of it as a big plus at the time, but we know what happened to push out of the war was the Japanese coming in. That meant that instead of a bare majority of one, all of a sudden the U.S. was practically 100% at war. So instead of this looking like a 15-year operation, it looked more like a 5 or 10. And I went in and volunteered. I had become a stenographer, and I was a pretty damn good one. So the result was that when I went into the Navy, they were desperate for people with abilities to language. So pretty soon they sent me to the naval operation down in Puerto Rico. After the course of a certain amount of time, the U.S. was getting ready to create a fleet of vessels, and they were looking for people to man those vessels. The vessels were called LST, which stands for Landing Ship Tanks, and they were large. Our crew was 10, and we had 2 other added to that, and those were medical people, because our ship was fitted out with space to take on the wounded. When we first got to England, my job was executive officer, which meant that I was mostly in charge of directing the ship. The first trip, we were slotted to be one of the first ones over there. There were probably, 15 LSTs operating around, but we had the honor of being the number one, and the battle was not going well for us on the first day around Normandy. So although we were originally designed to go in on the afternoon of D-Day, as we were going in, we were flagged to turn around and go back and stay overnight about 10 miles from the shore. And then the next day we were told to go back in. It's hard to be exact about what you remember, but I don't remember a minute's fear. There's something about warfare, especially if you think it's a necessary thing and you've got to do the best you can, that you just say, well, my job is to do this. And I know my brother had already died in a battle, so on our second trip in, we got through the first one all right. And as that was coming over close to shore, we were following a line of ships and the one in front of us maybe 100 feet away. And I was conning the ship, so I was right there at the conning station, And all of a sudden, the one in front was upside down. It hit some kind of mine. So that meant that when we being right behind them, wow, we were a little careful going in. And then 2 days later, when we were coming across the channel, we were hit by a mine and lost a fair number of people, including a crew. I still have a vivid memory of one of our young guys, about 17 or 18, who had been in the crew's quarters when the thing blew up. He was near the crew's quarters, and he ran up to the open deck and jumped into the water. We were struck by the mine halfway across the channel, so we were towed the rest of the way in and discharged our load of equipment, and then we were towed back to England, and after we were patched up, we were towed all the way back to New York City. I left the ship at that point. My youngest son took me to Normandy. There were 22 nations that took part in the battles of Normandy, and one representative of each of those countries were put in a special place. I was the one for USA. I have been critical about American history. I found I could make a very good case against our taking part in this war, and this war, and this war, and this war. We had a whole string of them in our history. But I couldn't think of one argument against our participation in World War II. I guess there's one thing I'm glad of is that if I had to be in a war, I was in a justifiable war.